He didn't propose in Spanish either.
Well, he might have. We didn't hear the
Didn't you?
proposal, but I did finally hear the yes from Senator Robles.
They tell me that one time in Idaho, there were two members of the House that were married and they lived in different districts. They were both sitting members in the Idaho House.
Be careful how you speak about that state.
Oh, I've
It's a
got
So I wonder if Representative Escamilla and okay, great. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. You ready to rock?
Yes, we are ready.
Go.
Let's
Welcome to press availability. Had our first day. Thankfully, we did suspend the rules on the short title, on the long titles, so we could get through all those bills, and those will go to the Rules Committee, and we'll have a few bills to address this afternoon. Mainly wanted to go ahead and address any questions that you have as the press.
Listen, what's the chance of a tax increase of any kind passing this session?
I think very low. Anybody else? Everybody else?
I agree. Does that include any type of like maybe changing how it's done, indexing or doing kind of like
I think that those, there are a number of proposals. There's the local option for transportation. There's the indexing in whole or in part of the gas tax. Problem with indexing in whole is that when you have a cents per gallon, it creates a very stable revenue stream because the gas price probably is the most volatile commodity out there. It goes up, it goes down, and without some stable amount there, it creates tremendous volatility in the revenue stream. So we should not get rid of the gas tax as it stands today in its entirety, but there may be some argument to have a partial indexing of the gas tax and set that in place this year. But as I have mentioned a number of times before, this is a can we cannot kick down the road. We need to address this and address it effectively because we have some tremendous unfunded liabilities as far as roads are concerned, and maybe Senator Adams could address some of those unfunded liabilities. And for many years now, we've robbed the general fund to pay for those roads, and I believe we're at our limit with that, and maybe even we need to pare back a little bit. And by doing that, that frees up more funds for higher ed in the general fund, and that would leave more money for public ed in the education fund, which is an effort that we need to address and have some serious discussions about.
Yeah, we have unfunded liabilities, but what we find is when we invest in infrastructure, whether it's one of the greatest parts of infrastructure is our people, and that investment comes in education, in my mind, or you invest in actually the facilities that move people around, you get great economic development. And that's what's driving our economy, is we have educated people, we have a lot of them, we have twice the birth rate, and we need to find a way to keep moving them. And if we don't keep up with the infrastructure needs, we find the economy slows, and we have great needs all around the state, whether it is in eastern Utah, by where they're actually doing the extraction of the refineries, or the refinery, the product, but or whether it's along the Wasatch Front. We're still driving on the same concrete in Davis County that was on I-15 that was poured back in the 1960s. And the infrastructure needs there. We're finding east-west roads are struggling to move around the valley. We're finding public transit too. There's just, we need to move people. We need to continue to maintain a great quality of life here. And you'll probably see some issues as we move people around with air quality. And I think that'll be a real issue for this session as to how to deal with the air quality issues that we're all experiencing.
Let me add this from the perspective of a budget. We never plan our budget in anticipation it's going to be a tax increase that's going to change it. we go with the base budget we have now. We know we need some flexibility when February figures come in. But if we have to fund the program, we'll have to find it internally within the existing budget we have now. So if a tax increase occurs, it occurs, but it's not being driven because we need more money for the budget.
Does leadership have sort of a game plan for addressing these alcohol proposals?
Well, I don't know if we necessarily have a game plan. We don't know what the proposals are. We've heard that there might be a proposal to do away with the Zion's wall, or whatever you want to call it, the separate preparation area in restaurants. We've talked a little bit about that as a Senate caucus or majority caucus, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of favor for that, but yet we have not seen what the proposal is yet, so we're waiting to see what bills. I think that, at least we've heard, that will be starting in the House, and I'd be anxious to see what that proposal is before we make a judgment on it.
Senator Davis just walked in too.
We'll put you in the middle. That's right.
And there's also the intent to dine law. There's a proposal in the House.
So we've also heard
that law.
right, but I think that's the beauty of our current law as far as restaurants are concerned, is that you need to consume food along with any alcohol, the 70-30 split, so to speak. The purpose of these laws is to keep people off the road that are intoxicated, to try to minimize the influence of alcohol on youth. And a restaurant is a place where the least amount of problems happen because they're partaking food at the same time. And so we tend to, at least I feel, and I think most of our Senate Majority Caucus would feel, that we don't need to change that.
So there's no appetite for changing the status quo in terms of those specific issues?
I haven't seen any appetite from our body on those specific.
Just say there's no thirst to.
We've done some pretty sweeping changes over the last couple of years, and at times you keep moving the ball. I think maybe you need to look to see what you've done and give it some time to find out really if there's a problem or how it's functioning. I think that's one of the questions as to how much work we've done. Senator Valentine's been a real champion, and we've seen lots of reform.
I think that's a great highlight. Thank you, Senator, is that we seem to have some kind of alcohol policy discussion every year. And again, I don't want to necessarily say absolutely today we're not addressing those issues here in the Senate, or might not get some favor, but because we haven't seen what the proposals are yet. So we're waiting to see what those proposals are before we're really firmly passing judgment on where the Senate will be on those bills.
Can you talk about Medicaid expansion? The speaker mentioned that in her opening remarks today, and just saying that may not be the right answer for how Utah should handle this. Has the Majority Caucus discussed this issue and maybe what they'd like to see? Or?
Senator Oakland, you want to address that?
We've been talking about it for a while now, as you know. We're kind of waiting for some kind of a policy to coalesce. We see what's happening in other states where full expansion has been accepted already, and others who are holding back and kind of waiting. I think between the governor's office and the legislature, I'd like to have a real good discussion this year. I think our caucus would like to move forward on this issue and try to come up with a policy that we think works, and whether it's full expansion or some other proposal that may come out of the governor's office or from the legislature, we'd like to move the ball a little bit and come up with a policy that we think works. So I think it's going to be a great discussion during the legislative session. I think from the remarks of the governor that we've heard, at least, he'd like to see it move forward as well. So she's certainly going to be part of the discussion.
I think you'll see a Utah solution. There's a group that has no coverage currently between, and I think we'll look to see how that affects the decision making as we move through the process. I mean, here we sit on day one, and it's a 45-day process, and you've got to love it because there's lots of time for public comment, lots of time for input, and I think at the end of the day, we'll find what I think will be a Utah solution.
So if I understand right, Senator Okerlund, it sounds like the governor said last week doing nothing is off the table. You expect there will be something done, some expansion to some degree. It just remains to be seen.
Well, I guess from what I've heard from our caucus, I think I would agree with that a little bit. I think it's something that we certainly need to take a look at, and again, there will be a good discussion during the session, and what we end up coming up with, I think will make some sense. We have to look at what we can afford. You know, I was mentioning this morning, we're seeing right now the federal government is cutting back PILT payments to the states, payment in lieu of taxes on federal lands. There's so much uncertainty with the federal government that we have to make sure that we can afford whatever program we move forward with because of the uncertainty in the federal government. So I think we're going to be careful and make sure that we can afford whatever it is that we decide to advance.
I'm kind of curious why, I know the governor has implied that maybe there'll be some sort of expansion, and even though it's 100%, it isn't free. We'll have to appropriate some money for administration, and I think that's up to about 8 or 9%. At least that's what almost 10%. And I didn't see anything in the governor's budget to cover an increase like that. Senator Hilliard, maybe you could.
I thought the first years were 100%.
First couple, yeah.
They're not completely 100%. There's actually some costs of the state in administering the population, and at least what we got in, maybe Senator Davis, I know you were in some of those meetings in the Health Systems Reform Task Force, but we were told that it's upwards of close to 10% of whatever we take as a cost to the state just in administration. So it isn't absolutely free. And I don't have all those specific numbers off the top of my head, but I know that was a discussion that we had in Health Systems Reform. I don't know, you might
I
want
think
to
one of the
address
things, we
that.
can look at the current management in Medicaid, a lot of that will be mirrored in any expansion. So it wouldn't be that, I mean, there is an amount of money that we're going to have to appropriate for management purposes of expanding Medicaid. However, when you take that with the thousands of lives that would then have that opportunity to be covered, and the healthcare cost savings in our economy could be substantial. That's the reason I really believe we need to look at the Medicaid expansion.
Let me just add two other things. With our current revenue projections with so little general fund money, we don't have the money right now to fund even the Medicaid that may increase just because people who now are qualified and now start to take the Medicaid. So we've got to find money internally to fund that as we are right now. I'm going to insist, if I have any say about it, that if we do expand, that we have a trigger there that once the government doesn't pay 100%, that the action's repealed. So we come back and say, okay, we thought it was going to cost us $30 million to expand when we went to 3% or whatever we had to pay, but in fact it turns out to be $120 million. So that the people at that particular time can take a choice, where are you going to find the money to fund it, to reinstate it? I think if we let it go on and then we get the burden to try to fund it, you separate the two things. And so I think if once the government doesn't fund 100% of it, then I think the state needs to take a very careful look. Do they want to continue, and where are they in fact going to find the money to pay for the expansion, the cost out of the state?
Any other questions on Medicaid expansion? Any other issues?
I want to ask about Senator Adams touched on air quality. I know we had this big rally over the weekend, and last week we had the bipartisan group present some bills. I'm wondering, do you think, between this bipartisan group working on it, we've got a couple thousand people who showed up. Is there enough momentum that we'll see a lot of those bills pass this year, or are there any concerns in Senate majority about any particular proposals?
I think you'll see some of the bills passed. I mean, it's something that I don't think we can ignore, so I think you'll see us deal with it. Again, we've got lots of different options, and I think one of the challenges is anytime you try to do something, you need funding. So I think there'll be a funding element. We're looking at everything from converting state police to try to give the opportunity for alternate fuels to actually take hold in Utah. I mean, there's been a great effort in the past. Questar's been a great corporate citizen as they've built stations up and down the state. We're seeing big natural gas vehicles actually be factory-made trucks that are being produced. I think the alternate fuels will be part of the issue. One thing the public, I had a town hall meeting and people were amazed that 11% of the pollution is actually created by industry, and almost 60% is created by our vehicles. We need to do a better job in both our habits and in the type of vehicles we drive. Everyone needs to own this. It can't be a legislative problem, it can't be a city problem. Every individual needs to own this issue. And I think if everyone owns it, we've got a chance at cleaning up our air. And we're surely going to do what we can this session to try to jumpstart it. Yeah, I think it's got to be one of the top issues, at least for me, as to both economically and health-wise to deal with air quality.
Are there any proposals in particular that you think deal with air quality and would help the state achieve this goal of?
Oh, absolutely. Just what I
changing
talked
habits?
about, alternate fuels. I mean, we have people moving. We have electric vehicles being made. I think if you look at the newer vehicles, especially those late model vehicles, the 2013 or 14s, they're a lot more efficient than the vehicles even in the early 2000s. As we see those older vehicles be retired and newer vehicles come on, that's one issue. We're talking about different types of fuels, natural gas, of course, and even though electric vehicle may use fossil fuels, though that electricity is produced off the Wasatch Front and helps the inversion. So I think vehicle conversion is probably one of the biggest ones you'll see.
I think we need to highlight that the state has made significant gains in air quality.
Yes.
And the data shows that we have a lot cleaner air today than we had 10 years ago. Should that stop us from making some more incremental gains? Absolutely not. And I think there's a couple of proposals out there that, I'm not sure what they are exactly, but if we can give some incentive for people to convert their wood-burning heat to a natural gas, and there's some way we can incentivize them to do that, I think that would be a great proposal. There's some talk about Tier 3 cars that will come out in 2017. How do we turn over, and they come out in 2017, but it takes years for people to buy Tier 3 cars, but will significantly reduce emissions. So those are some great proposals, but the real gains, because even with those changes, you're going to still have days like this out there. The real change has got to come from every person, as Senator Adams has talked about. You need to walk around your neighborhood to your different appointments. Don't drive your car. Use transit whenever possible. Carpool. Those are all really good ways to do your part to reduce emissions and help keep our air clean. Every person has got to be involved in this. We have to do it as a people. It isn't going to be solved by a piece of legislation. It's got to be changed in the attitudes and the practices of the people if we want to have clean air, and they're going to have to conserve on energy. I think that's the bottom line with clean air. Not that we shouldn't address some of the issues, and we will, because we want to have the clean air, but I personally call upon the people in these valleys to think a little bit more about how they can participate in lowering the thermostat in the winter, increasing the thermostat in the summer. You might do even a bike commute if there's a safe way to get to work on a bicycle and use transit. We have a great transit infrastructure, and so I'm hoping that we slow the flows, so to speak, and that people catch on to that like they did with water conservation and conserve more energy, because that's where we'll get the biggest gains with air quality, is just by changing, and it doesn't have to be huge changes in your habits, just some small changes will make a big difference for our valleys and our clean air.
Maybe we could ban all reporters from coming here unless they carpool with a little bit in the car.
Maybe every lawmaker can bring a reporter to work.
There you go.
Senator, there's 79 bills dealing with education, there'll probably over 100 by the time the session finishes. Is that too much? At what point are too many people picking at the educational process here in the state?
Well, I'm a big fan of us creating accountability and then not micromanaging education. I haven't seen what those bills are. Some of those obviously would be properly addressed, issues that we properly address here. But if we have that many bills, I can probably tell you there is some micromanaging going on, and I prefer not to micromanage.
It's hard when education is between 50 to 55% of our budget, not to have it consume a lot of the things we do up here.
Especially in election year.
Senator Davis?
You know, 55%, when we keep talking about our budget is spent on that, it's dedicated that way through our income tax. Because it's not, it is money that's on the table to be spent for education. And I agree with the President, one thing we need to do is begin looking at if we, as a body, are micromanaging the ability of education to do their jobs. And we have to look at that. We have to seriously look at that. We need to look at education as being an infrastructure that isn't a one-year budget. It's something we look at over a long period of time, because I think every child begins in kindergarten. It's 13 years before they graduate from public school, and another 4 years before they get a degree. So we've got to start thinking long-term and not how to fix it today and then come up with a different bill to try to fix it differently next year.
The speaker in her opening remarks today talked about how, and this kind of goes back to the Medicaid, I guess, but she said we need energy in the executive, not an inaction figure in the governor's office. Have you found the governor to be inactive?
That sounds cool.
It's laying down the gauntlet, isn't it?
I'll never see my wife.
Yeah, probably. We'll have to read the transcript of that. It's on video.
Remember, tension is a natural phenomenon of government.
I mean, is there an inactivity or a lack of leadership coming from the governor's office?
Well, I really haven't felt that. It's a tricameral, I guess. Senate, House, and the governor have to get together on those things, and I think there's with Medicaid expansion. We have been waiting for some direction from the governor because of his power to make that decision. He doesn't want to get ahead of the legislature, and so we're looking forward to having some discussions on that. But I'm not sure that we necessarily agree with that
Let me,
with that view.
you know, I'm really impressed with what the governor is doing on, through his Envision Utah program, where he's putting together study groups to look at some of the important infrastructure needs to handle the growth that we're going to have over the next several decades. He's put together groups to look at water and transportation and public lands and all those
Air quality.
air quality, all of these issues that are so important that we can begin to take a look at formulating some policy that's going to allow us to handle this tremendous growth that we've got out there. I think that's a really good way to get into those issues, because we're bringing together experts from all over the state to be involved in those discussions and to make recommendations back to the governor's office and eventually to the legislature, which I think shows some great leadership. So, you know, there may be some things that we're waiting on each other on a little bit, but for the most part, I think it's been a pretty good relationship and is working pretty well.
Is this a good tone to be starting the session with?
Pardon me?
Is this a good tone to be starting the session with? Is the president put it in the gauntlet?
Did he say that?
Yeah.
It might be empowering the Senate, so
Sure.
we're okay with that. So I just maybe make a comment about Envision Utah. That's an organization that's been around for probably 15, 16 years, late 90s. Some of the data-driven information that we get from that organization has really been of benefit already to our state. And we've got to address, I'm on the housing committee there, I actually serve on the board of Envision Utah, and it's all encompassing. And it really starts with land use. And we've got to get away from these, I don't want to mandate anything that what you can buy or what you can't buy, but we need to be looking as a population on greater densities that reduces infrastructure costs, that reduces air pollution, that reduces transportation costs, and it really boils down to having proper land use, and Envision Utah has done a great job in encouraging our cities and our counties in that area.
They're an example of collaboration, and that's what Utah does. I'm sure at the end of the day, we'll all come together and as we work on the issues to find again what I call a Utah solution, but that generally speaking means that whether it's local officials or state officials or interested parties from the private community or the private sector, there'll be a Utah solution, and that's what we're looking for. Envision Utah is really great at driving that, and they've done a good job.
Can I ask you about marriage? I don't know if you covered this before I got in here, but there are several bills. I guess some of them are either aimed at protecting. Senator Reid unveiled a few just last week about protecting religious freedoms in light of the marriage ruling. There are some others, I think, seeking to clarify Utah's stance on this issue. Where do you see the Senate going on the issue of marriage in particular in light of the Shelby ruling?
I think that we feel like that the people spoke out on this issue many years ago, and that we have a constitutional amendment, and that's a jurisdiction that we feel like is a state jurisdiction, how we deal with marriage. And so I think we're going to fight vigorously to protect that jurisdiction and do what we can to support the voice of the people with regards to our Amendment 3.
And I think hopefully there'll be a respectful tone. I think that's probably the key. Difficult issue, but it needs to be done with tolerance, respect for one another.
And that is a key. So we call on everybody to be completely civil in the process.
There are rallies and counter rallies scheduled for tomorrow, I guess, on that particular issue.
Yeah, and rallies are a great thing, so, I
When,
mean, that's part of freedom of speech.
Sure, sure. When you have those, when you have to articulate your views on why it should be, I mean, beyond the amendment itself being in place, how do you explain to people that you believe it should be one man and one woman?
For me, it's as much as a jurisdictional issue as it is anything. We've had jurisdiction over marriage and how we deal with marriage for over 200 years. And now we have, through the federal courts, federal government creeping into that jurisdiction. It seems that they're creeping into jurisdictions like healthcare and other things continue, and that's taking away from the autonomy that the states were supposed to have from the beginning. And so that's the main reason why I think that we need to vigorously defend our position, because it is what I feel is the jurisdiction of the state of Utah.
Lunchtime?
Senator Davis?
I think
Did
so.
you have any comments?
My comment on that would be that I hope that we keep a real cool head about ourselves
Yes.
and not get into legislation that becomes very, very divisive before we know exactly what the courts are going to declare, whether they declare the states' rights, as we want to, that we believe we have that jurisdiction, or the 14th Amendment, which means as a state we cannot discriminate against individuals separately. And so we need to take a look, and that's a very careful balancing act that we have to do. And I think what we should be doing is putting this issue at rest until at least we find out what the decisions of the courts are.
And there's, and I appreciate Senator Davis's comment on that, because there's been some talk about how we can minimize this until we know exactly what the results are going to be. I think that's a good comment.
Do you expect that's a path the Senate will take? Because, I mean, there are several bills that have been proposed that deal with it, at least.
I don't know, it's the legislative session, so.
First day, first day.
It's hard to predict what will happen here.
Okay, all right.
It always means where there's smoke, it doesn't necessarily mean there'll be fire.
I think it's time for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
After morning floor time, let's do an informal Q&A.